Republicans are outraged as Democrats and President Biden keep claiming that those opposed to their election overhaul bills are racist, like the segregationists of the past. Biden also accused the GOP of trying to prevent minorities from voting. Now a Democrat congressman from Georgia is getting in on the act. He said this after the Democrats' plans to change the filibuster failed.
It's not going away, even though the Senate last night failed to do what it should have done. And in some respects, we can call it a racist Senate. When you mention about how much of racism still exists in the soil of America, they want to plant their heads in that soil and refuse to acknowledge what's in the soil.
So how do Republican senators feel about that? Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana and a member of the Judiciary Committee, is in focus now. Senator, thank you for joining us today. First of all, what is your immediate reaction to what he just said?
Disgust. But first, I want to say something positive, Harris. You know, rest in peace, Meatloaf. He was one of the greatest vocalists and rock and rollers of all times. One of his best songs was Paradise by the Dashboard Lights, and I hope he's in paradise right now. I think he is. Now, let me answer your question. The Democratic congressman, he takes his cues from his leader, President Biden. I don't hate anybody. I look for grace wherever I can find it. Let me tell you, I've spent time with him. President Biden is a nice guy. He is. Is President Biden a perfect person? No. Does he try to do better every day? Also no. Therein lies the problem. He keeps trying to stuff more diapers down the toilet. He goes down to Georgia 2 weeks ago and demonstrated raw gut racial demagoguery. And that's what the congressman is just parroting, the clip that you just showed. President Biden basically said to tens of millions of Americans who don't want to have an election month, who want to have an election day, who believe that if you vote, you ought to have to prove you are who you say you are. He basically told all the tens of millions of Americans who believe that they are Bull Connor, George Wallace racists. Now, it offended me. It offended tens of millions of Americans. I was offended when Vice President Harris, when she was run against President Biden in the primaries, I was offended when she all but called President Biden a racist for not supporting getting 10-year-old kids up at 4:30 in the morning and busing them for 2 hours. Lots of Americans opposed, black and white opposed the busing. She called him a racist for it. I thought that was racial demagoguery. This is not helping our country. It is not helping our country at all. And I'll just say this. The American people are getting pretty tired of being called a racist or a traitor or a Nazi because they don't agree with the president's woke neo-socialist agenda. And that is why his poll numbers are on a journey to the center of the earth. And he needs to stop it.
Senator, I want to bring in now the minority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, hitting back on President Biden's claim that Republicans don't stand for anything. Let's watch.
My good friend, the president, got it wrong once again. If the president starts acting like a moderate, like he campaigned, we can do business. The reason we've not been speaking recently this year is because he adopted the Bernie Sanders prescription for America.
What's your reaction to that?
I think McConnell's right. Look, the American people who voted for President Biden thought they were getting the second coming of President Obama. They got the second cousin of Bernie Sanders. That's not what they wanted. I like Bernie, but he tested negative for president. He lost. And President Biden or whoever's advising him have told him, I don't care what the president says. He's adopted Bernie Sanders' agenda. And that's not what the American people want. And he's also said, if you don't agree with me, President Biden has said, you're a Bull Connor, George Wallace racist.
So when he was asked about
that low?
When he was asked about that, the senator, he said, well, I didn't say that. I'm sure you saw the exchange. It was pretty nasty.
I saw it, yeah.
In terms of attitude from the president, because he was trying to correct the reporter for asking him the question correctly. The reporter said, you know, are they in the same lane? Are they in the same, do they have the same sort of tinge as that? I'm paraphrasing the reporter now, and the president said, I never said that, blah, blah, blah. But he did say it. He didn't call somebody that name. He said they would be just like that person. Well, there's, I guess, a shade of difference there, but he's more concerned about the question and answer period on that than actually what's happening, it would seem. I want to get to you on this. Massive backlash against former Clinton Labor Secretary Robert Reich. He tweeted that Democratic senators should have given Senator Kyrsten Sinema, quote, unquote, the backs of their hands after she refused to vote in favor of blowing up the filibuster. One tweet says, feminists sure got quiet on this one. A friend of the show, Jason Rantz, wrote, well, this is Robert Reich saying Democrats should assault a female senator because the Democrat Party is the champion of women. Uh-oh. And some high snark here from Robert Reich himself. Or not from him, but about him. Robert Reich is 411. If he wanted to, 411, excuse me, if he wanted to backhand Sinema, he'd need a set of doggy stares. Wow. Senator Reich deleted and clarified that tweet. He claimed the conservative media distorted his words. Senator Kennedy, your response to all of it?
Here's my response. To former Secretary Reich, I would say, you know, you can only be young once, but you can always be immature. And I think he just demonstrated that maximum. I mean, nobody pays attention to him, and I'm sorry he said it. Let me say a word about Senator Sinema. We agree on some things. We don't agree on others. Here's my experience with Senator Sinema. She's whip smart. She's very independent. She's charming. She loves her people, and she's tough as a boot. And they can beat on her. They can hit her with everything but a chair. And she's going to do what she thinks is right, and that's what she did.
Wow. There's a violence.
And if it wasn't for double standards, among my woke friends, there wouldn't be any standards at all.
Senator, there is a violent tinge to this, though. And I guess, you know, in looking at this from the party in particular, and both parties do this, they say that everybody should be treated the same and that there should be nonviolence and nonviolent protesting, so on and so forth. But there might be some hypocrisy on the other side of the aisle on this one. Your quick take on that, and we'll move on.
I think there's probably hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle on that. But I also believe that my Democratic colleagues are wrong to call everybody in the Milky Way a racist who doesn't agree with them.
All right. Liberal media gushing over President Biden's Wednesday news conference. They apparently missed the messy part when he took on Russia and Ukraine and the questioning on that about the legitimacy of the midterms, and at one point yelled at a reporter. Here's just a taste from an MSNBC analyst. Let's watch together.
To go for an hour and 50 minutes, hour and 45 minutes, and not screw up, really demonstrably not screw up really at all. It's really hard to do that. The best answer was, hey, if you think I'm senile and I'm doddering, you get up here and try to do an hour and 45 minutes in front of you and your colleagues and not screw up. He didn't. I thought it was the best demonstration of the fact that the president's mind is perfectly fine.
Okay. And what do you say, Senator?
Well, the author there must have missed the part about Ukraine. I mean, what the president said about Ukraine was dangerous and stupid. I mean, he basically, at least I think this is what Putin heard. He said, if you go in and it's a minor incursion, the penalties won't be as bad. Now, the White House will deny he said that, but that's what he said. I heard it. Everybody heard it. And, you know, weakness invites the wolves. You got to be armed for peace. And the Biden administration for a month has just sat here like a bump on a log sucking on their teeth. You know what? Here's what President Biden should have said to Putin right away, as soon as he saw the first troops on the border. He should have called him. He should have said, Vladimir, I don't want to mess in your country's affairs, but we're thinking at some point about allowing our friends in Ukraine to join NATO, their allies, and don't go in. I'm taking no options off the table, and if you go in, you'll regret it. And if you go in, I and all of my allies will teach you about time travel and knock you into next week. Now, do I support sending troops into Ukraine? No. But why did the president take that off the table? And now Putin thinks we're weak. I can't see anything that the Biden administration. Well, no, and I can't see anything that President Biden has done to put together a coalition to stand with us. I mean, where's France? Where's Germany? Where's Canada? Where's Japan? Where's South Korea? You know, Secretary Blinken should have put together this coalition, all of our freedom-loving, democracy-loving allies, and we need to hold a joint press conference held by President Biden saying, Mr. Putin, we're together. Don't do this. And if you do it, you're going to regret it, and take no options off the table.
That would be remarkable. And I'm wondering if the president would listen to you on that one.
It's not that.
And if it's too late.
I mean, it's common sense.
I mean, my parents taught me that it's never too late to do something great. I would.
Well, I hope it's not too late.
Yeah.
These are high stakes.
They are indeed, and you have laid it out beautifully for us today. You, General Keane, telling us, showing us what's next, potentially because of what happened just a few days ago, just a couple of days ago, just in terms of how we might have been able to change it, or still could. I mean, they could still do all of the things you just suggested. Senator Kennedy of the great state of Louisiana, thank you for being in focus on this Friday.
Thanks, Harris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.